who is the most undervalued player in fantasy football going into the training camp season. That and more this week on the couch. So excited to be joined by Dwain McFarland. Dwain, you've done all of your off-season prep. Who stands out to you as the most undervalued player?
Man, these questions, like, it's so hard to narrow it down. Like, I start thinking position by position. There's players that I would want to talk about. I don't know if this is going to be the right answer, like thinking about everyone, but a player that I do think is sincerely undervalued versus their peers is George Kittle.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
George Kittle with Deebo Samuel gone already was the tight end one last year. And we just know, like, the kind of player he is. I know he's getting a little bit older, Sig, but in my mind, like, he really shouldn't be going so far after Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. And I love those two players, but I'm not drafting them a ton right now. I'm like 35 drafts in on Underdog right now, and I don't have a lot of Bowers or Trey McBride. And the simple reason is I just want to draft George Kittle in round 4 or 5.
Right?
Just like, man, like, I mean, getting the dynamic change and the shift in the offense, right? With these players changing around, we've got the uncertainty with Ayuk. The very, very easy answer could just be, we're going to roll back time 5 years to whenever we just completely fed George Kittle. And it's the beauty of Kittle, in my opinion, Sig, as much as we love Brock Bowers, as much as we love Trey McBride, so far they've really just been kind of like underneath, catch the ball, do a little bit of run after the catch. But Kittle is an elite run after the catch player. Kittle can beat you down the field on the deep crossers, on the seam routes. Like, he just makes these huge plays where if he came up with 100 receptions, right, and he was healthy all year, and we knew that Brock Bowers also came up with 100 receptions, who would you bet on having more yards and touchdowns?
Yeah, that's simple, right? Yeah, this is one of those things.
It's Kittle, right?
It's Kittle. Well, look, this is one of those things where you can look over ADP and you say, that's wrong. I mean, we try to say if, or this is my position, but that's just wrong. And I can say, going into drafts right now, and I think this is probably going to persist through the summer, Dwain, because we're going to do our best to push Kittle up to McBride and Bowers level. But one of the simplest, write it in pen, an edict, don't take Brock Bowers or Trey McBride in your redraft league. Just don't. Okay, because you're passing up the chance to get George Kittle a round or two later. And then you start to fill in, like you said, we can go position by position. And you say, well, I mean, even Sam Laporta in, say, the 6th round starts to look interesting. And then we can talk about any number of upside tight ends. But the George Kittle thing makes me want to start humming the Battle Hymn of the Republic. I mean, because
that feels
right. Rob Gronkowski, if you're going to say Rob Gronkowski's the GOAT at tight end, I mean, I'm not going to vociferously argue against that, but my vote goes to George Kittle. And I like to take a moment out to say that what makes George Kittle so special, other than that he's the joyful warrior. I mean, much like Rob Gronkowski, Marshawn Lynch, Hines Ward, the joyful warrior. I mean, he's the archetype. But also, what makes him the GOAT at tight end is that he's elite at everything that you ask a tight end to do.
Yes.
He's an elite run blocker. He's an elite pass blocker. He's an elite route runner. He's elite at the catch point. He's elite after the catch. He's elite as far as athletics. How is he a 4th round pick? And the other thing is, fantasy football, I say, is about sharing in greatness, a specific kind of greatness that attracts you. And, for me, top of that is the joyful warrior. So, you can take him in the 3rd or 4th round. I think the 3rd round is totally fine. There's a lot of good players in the 3rd round. 3rd round's pretty sweet this year. So you might say, I'm going to let it ride. I'm not going to take Kittle in the 3rd. In the 4th, I'm going to take whoever.
If you're picking at the very beginning, right, of, the 3rd round, and you really want Kittle, you're probably going to have to take, he's probably not making it back. But if you're picking in the middle to the end of the 3rd round, you can let him slide back around to you. And it also depends, are you in today's society, right? A lot of us draft hundreds of fantasy teams. So if you're doing that, you just kind of let it roll, right? You just get him as often as you can, in that 4th round. And you don't mind, if you miss out on him a few times. But if you get to just, there's some of us, I'm not included in this, but I do remember the purity of those days where you're just in 1 or 2 leagues.
Or the league you care the most
guys,
about.
that you really want. or the league you carry the most amount. And as long as it's not shooting yourself in the foot where you're passing on other guys at the same range where you're like, but when you look at where Kittle goes, if you took him at the beginning of the third round, you're talking about other guys that have questions, more questions than George Kittle in my mind. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr., going right there. I mean, you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, who we really like. We got a new quarterback that might not work well with the offensive line. We've got overlap with what Cooper Kupp does. Like, we want to buy in on players that broke out, in their second year that were first round picks, JSN. So he's going to be a guy that I'm going to draft plenty. But like, I think that you could pick apart a lot of different players there. And if Kittle were to go back to really before, if you go back and look at his targets, before we started adding Deebo Samuel to the offense, before we added Brandon Ayuk to the offense, man, it was pretty insane. I think people forget, like, his yards per route run were like Julio Jones for 3 years in a row. 2.82, 3.12, 2.84. Guys, those are the top of top numbers for, doesn't matter your position. Like literally that is Julio Jones type numbers. And his targets per route run in those years, Sig, 26, 31, and 28%. I'm not saying he's getting all the way back to those, but he doesn't have to. To blow things out of the water. And guys, again, he was the tight end one last year.
Yeah.
He already was the tight end one.
With what, Dwayne, like 90 targets, right? I think that's about what he got last year, 90.
Imagine if this man gets 120.
Oh my.
And I think it's in the range of outcomes.
Sure it is.
Like, we've built ceiling and floor rankings logic over at Fantasy Life. That was one of my big projects for the off season. Myself and a really good mathematician named James McCool. He helps me out with a lot of this stuff. And like right now, I'm just pulling up like the tight ends and looking at the range of outcomes. So, I've got Kittle projected, for 4.5 catches per game, but like his ceiling is like 5.7 catches per game. But his ceiling in fantasy points per game, like if he ran really pure across his catches, his yards, and his touchdowns, and those things correlate together. So it's easy. If you do one thing, you could do the other. It's not like this outlandish thing. Man, he could be near 20 fantasy points per game. You're getting him as a tight end. So that's in a PPR and a half PPR. You're probably more looking like, 17 fantasy points per game, but still that's a lot of fantasy points, no matter what position you're talking about. Like, how confident, I'll say this. I'm more confident that George Kittle could score 16 fantasy points per game this year in a PPR than I am Marvin Harrison. And I like Marvin Harrison Jr. A lot of guys that weren't that good as rookies that were wide receiver 3s like he was, do turn into wide receiver 1s the next year when they have the kind of draft capital Marvin Harrison Jr. does. Sometimes the light just goes on, but like if I got to pit it against George Kittle and you really made me, like somebody comes to you, Sig, you got to put your mortgage on it. 16 fantasy points per game, minimum 8 games played. George Kittle.
Right. You don't even need to say 16 just whatever. I don't care what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm just, like helping me, helping me put a fire out of my house or something. I'll still take George Kittle. No disrespect to Marvin. No, but you're right. From a bottom line number standpoint, the problem with taking Brock Bowers and Trey McBride is you're getting a 16 point a game player where there's other 19 or 20 point a game players. Now you're saying tight end's a tougher position to get points, but you can get the 16 point a game tight end later in your draft, and you're taking him compared to other 16 point running backs and wide receivers. Your lineup's not suffering, but like you said, there's a lot of upside there. Partially because last year it seemed like there was a clear message to Brock Purdy, like you can let it loose, but take chances.
Like if I in our model just change Brock Bowers to 6 receptions per game, which I've got, I mean not Brock Bowers, Kittle. Bowers I've got projected at 6.1. McBride I've got at 6.6. And then it creates a floor and a ceiling based off of that. But I mean, if I put George Kittle at 6 and it's reasonable, he's at 20 fantasy points per game. Like he's at the same as they are. Like I think it's in the range of outcomes. Like the ceiling case that the model's giving him is 5.7. So it's almost doing that anyway. Because when I put Bowers in and I put their medians, like we also know like they could catch like 8 balls a game. Like if I had to make a bet on who's going to catch more balls, Bowers or Trey McBride or Kittle, I'm taking the other two guys. But if you're asking me in a pure run out where they all caught similar balls, which one scores the most fantasy points? I think it's George Kittle by a mile.
So lots of hot George Kittle talk, but I mean that's how important this is. Like that's how low hanging this fruit is. Okay.
Well, I do think there's a I think there's another really big onesie player, and I bet you can guess who
I mean,
it is. It's kind of like Kittle.
I think
It's
Baker
the dual threat
Mayfield.
quarterback.
Oh,
That's just
see, I don't
so.
think. I mean, now look, there are other. I could go on for 10 minutes about Baker Mayfield, but I want to hear who you want to go on about.
Well, it's just right now. It's Jalen Hurts. Like Jalen Hurts goes a round to 2 rounds after Josh Allen is gone, after Lamar Jackson is gone, and about a half round after what we're seeing Jaden Daniels come off the board. And I think the wrong assumption everyone's making, and it might play out this way, is that the Eagles are going to run the ball as much as they did last year. They ran really pure, Sig. They played in a lot of these games where they played from way ahead and they didn't have to throw the ball at the end of the game. If you look at the weapons they have, it makes sense to want to throw the ball a little more when you have, Devontae Smith, you've got A.J. Brown, you've got Dallas Goedert, you clearly have the weapons. What if the defense just somehow regresses and they get into more shootouts and they need to throw more? So like the Eagles are going to throw more this year, no matter what, than what they did last year. It was like a 48% drop back rate. Like that never repeats. Going back to the history of the last 30 years, teams that have been in that range never repeat. Now that doesn't mean they won't be a run heavy team. Like the next year, they still may be one of the more run heavy teams, but they're going to throw the ball more. And when you look at what we get from the tush push, like he's a lock for 10 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback. That's insane. He's a lock for 10 rushing touchdowns as long as he's healthy. And if you look at the years before last year, Sig, he was more of a 3,500 to 4,000 yard passer. Like, and he could easily be back in that range. Like, we know they still want to hand the ball to Saquon. We know they still want to let their offensive line do their thing. But man, there's so many paths here. And the easiest one is they're just going to throw the ball more than they did last year, even if they're a run heavy team. And people are letting Jalen Hurts go in round 5.
Right.
I mean, and so like when you start looking at, and right now I'm looking at underdog just because the ADP, I get it, guys. That's not how all home leagues and everything work, but it's easy just to kind of start pitting like who the other players are that are around these guys that we're taking. Like people are taking, and don't get me wrong, I like Omarion Hampton, but people are taking Omarion Hampton over Jalen Hurts. Like, aren't we getting too cute? We're taking Jamison Williams before we're taking Jalen Hurts. We're taking Xavier Worthy, who I really like, but we're taking him over Jalen Hurts. The other thing this year, Sig, is we don't have a Jaden Daniels that we might take in round 9. Last year, like my whole draft, like manifesto was wait at quarterback because Jaden truly is a guy that could run as much as those other guys. And if we get lucky with how good of a passer he was his last 2 years at LSU, he might be a 4,000 yard passer, which puts him in a really small group of people. And it worked out. This year, we do like Justin Fields, and I'm not trying to hate on Justin. Like, I think Justin's a great draft target later if you miss out on some of the guys. But we also know Justin Fields is not going to throw for 300 yards a game and run for 60. Like, so he doesn't have quite the dual ceiling that the other guys do. He can still come through for you in fantasy. But last year we had Jaden Daniels, 5 years ago, going into the second year of Lamar, we had Lamar. 2 years ago, we were wrong on this one, but we had Anthony Richardson. That one didn't work out. He turned out to be a little bit more like a Justin Fields. But the point being is there's no one sitting there, in my opinion. We can jump into Baker Mayfield. In my opinion, though, that gives you that true dual threat guy that we know we can get in round 8 or 9 to offset the elites, the dual threat elites. In my opinion, this year, one of the best strategies is to actually just take one of the dual threat elite quarterbacks in round 3 or 4. Because you just start looking, man, at the decisions that you're making. It's Josh Allen versus Jackson Smith and Jigba or Kyron Williams. Like, I'm sorry. Like, Josh Allen is just a much safer bet than either of those players. And I'm more likely to replace Kyron Williams later in my draft than I am Josh Allen. And so a lot of years, I'm not after the elite quarterbacks at the beginning. I just think the way the landscape is this year, I do like it. But let's talk Baker Mayfield, because I'm actually a little concerned about Baker.
Okay, so this will be a good one.
You talk me off the ledge.
Well, I will get to Baker, but I want to address what you said about Jalen Hurts, because I think there's a couple of things going on that are really excellent here. Okay, you brought up the key point, which is look at Jalen Hurts' pass volume last year. I know he missed a couple of games. I guarantee this is one of those like man on the street questions, Dwayne. If we said how many passes did Jalen Hurts throw last year to people, like without looking, like what? How many? Like 5% of people maybe would be within 10, right? What's the number? 361, I think. in 15 games.
I don't have it in front of me. It's
It's
really
like
low,
3,
though.
yeah.
I mean, they had the lowest pass rate in the league, so
Yeah.
it was really low.
It was crazy low. And the other thing is, this isn't just a Jalen Hurts take. This is an A.J. Brown take. This is a Javonte Smith take.
Yes.
Devon
It's the weapons,
and
man.
Dallas Goedert too. Because what I really like to do is basically examine the hive mind, the conventional wisdom, and just look at last year's ADP and this year's ADP. It's a really wonderful apples to apples comparison, right? It's like the fantasy football community looked at this player and all the things that are confluences at this player's value and judged that he was worth this. Now they're looking at the same player, maybe some of the confluences and factors are different. And okay, AJ Brown.
So 194 yards passing per game last year, by far a career low, and he still averaged 22.4 fantasy points per game, despite that. Right? I mean, if you look at his rushing touchdowns the last 3 years, 14, 15, and 13. Like saying 10 as a lock is like low. Right? If you look at his passing yards per game in the previous 3 years, they've been run balanced to run heavy teams in the other years as well. It just didn't run as extreme as last year. So his passing yards per game over the last 3 years, starting with last year, 194, 227, 247. So just say you middle that and you put him more around that 225, you're still getting the rushing yards. You're still getting the rushing touchdowns. I mean, their dropback rate over expected in 2023 and 2022 was like slightly below the league average. Last year, they were the last, right? So they had ranked 25th and 17th in 22 and 23. And last year they ranked 32nd. So I still think they're going to be a team that wants to run the ball, but man, like he's not throwing for 194 yards again. Like he's going to throw for more than that. And it could be a lot more than that. Like it could be 250.
Right. I like how you talk about if things run pure. You sound like a gambler, but that's good. That's a fun old world. It would have been a fun old world like Damon Runyon to be in back in the day. But you're right that the simplest way I can sum all this up on Jalen Hurts and the Philly pass offense is they're going to throw more. The only question is how much more. So we might not be building in, our imagination might not be allowing. I mean, let's face it, Saquon Barkley had over 480 touches. Him breaking down is a possibility. I mean, maybe it's a slim possibility, and then all of a sudden becomes a Jalen Hurts and Will Shipley, there's some positive buzz around. But
Jalen's median projection for me is 22.5. Guys, the average for a top 3 quarterback since 2011 is 22 fantasy points. Right. And so we're typically looking for players that give us a ceiling of 22 plus. This is a player that gives us a median of 22 and a half. His ceiling, to your point, if he ran pure and he actually did throw a little bit more, threw a few more touchdowns and stayed kind of doing what he's been doing on the ground, 28 and a half fantasy points. Like that's his 90th percentile outcome. Now, again, would have to run really pure, but again, that's a huge ceiling, and you're not even betting on it. You're betting on the median being there. But the big thing being he could easily score 25, 26 fantasy points per game. And then, man, when you start comparing that to the QB 12 that your league mate is starting this year, I mean, you're getting it's a significant advantage.
Look, we've talked about George Kittle and Jalen Hurts at length now. And the point is that these are both players that could be the most valuable fantasy football commodity this year, and they're available in third, fourth round. And what's really cool about what we're doing, Dwain, is you can see how
Jalen's going in the 5th right now, dude. It's insane. Going at the beginning of round 5.
So you can see how we can start with individual player takes, right? We can start with an individual player take, and then very quickly a draft strategy emerges. Right.
It's really hard not to want to take Kittle in round 4 and then Hurts right away in round 5.
Or I'll tell you,
it's not always easy to do the 2 onesie positions like that in your first 5 rounds, but man, very tempting.
I'll go one step further, right? Because circling back to what I was saying, Dwain, is I like to look at last year's ADP and this year's ADP. Okay. AJ Brown was like 8th, 9th pick last year.
He's underpriced.
Mid-second, right? Devonta Smith, 3rd round pick last year, late 4th, even 5th round pick this year. Dallas Goedert, who was a top 10 tight end when he was healthy. Dallas Goedert is outside of the top 10 tight ends. So all 4 of these players, like you say, touchdowns and catches and yards moving together. Well, all of the passing game could move together. Plus you've got Kevin Patullo, new offensive coordinator. And like you said, I mean, they're going to want to run the ball, but I know it's not going to be as front facing as like the signature of the offense, because I think Patullo is smart enough to know that you can't just do exactly what you did last year.
So Real quick, just because you hit on it, and we can move on as soon as you're ready. But like, you're just bringing up so many important things here. So I'm working on my breakout article right now, and so there's different groups. There's your early breakouts, right? You break out as a rookie, 2, 3, year 2, 3. That's when most breakout happens, right? And I'm saying breakout to wide receiver 1, scoring 16 plus fantasy points per game. That's basically the wide receiver 1 cutoff going back to 2011. But once you start looking at these guys and going into years 5, 6, and 7, there's a few groups that really emerge. Okay. And like, if you look at it and break it down, the first group are the guys that have multiple wide receiver 2 finishes already on their resume. Who are the 2 biggest guys this year? Jalen Waddle has 3, so does Devonta Smith. And he, just like you said, last year, Jalen Waddle is another one, and Devonta Smith were going at the end of round 2. Now people are taking them in round 4 and 5 of fantasy drafts. That's wrong. Those are 2 really good young players that could easily be wide receiver 1s this year. So when you think about the group of where these wide receiver 1 breakouts, what happens is I think people get fatigued, Sig, because they're kind of like, they're just a wide receiver 2. And then you stop and think about it. You're like, well, I mean, he's playing with AJ Brown, and to be a wide receiver 2, do you know how hard that is? Or to be Jalen Waddle and play with Tyreek Hill and still be a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, do you know how hard that is? You know what the contingency value of these 2 players is? Knock on wood, we never want injuries. Right. But if suddenly AJ Brown were to go down for 8 games, you would be in love with Devonta Smith.
Right, right.
We would be ranking him as a wide receiver 1 every week. And the same thing for Jalen Waddle. Now, Jalen's battled his own injury nicks here and there a little bit more than what we've had with Devonta. But it's just a really good point from you. I mean, Devonta Smith should not be going that many rounds. All people have done is they flipped him and T. Higgins. Yeah. So if you think about it, T. Higgins the year before had a down year as a good wide receiver 2, and everybody's like, it's a round 4 or 5 pick. What does he do? He has a spike season in touchdowns last year. Joe Burrow goes nuts. Now everybody takes T. Higgins at the end of round 2, but now they want to take Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith at round 4 or 5. They're the same player.
Although
they're really good wide receiver 2s that play with good wide receiver 1s.
Of course, the difference being one is in an organization that's absolutely peaking, the other one an organization that's about to hit rock bottom, probably. But Waddle's cheaper. But look, the strategy to put a cherry on top of this specific discussion, then we'll move to Baker Mayfield, is a strategy that emerges real easy. Like, let's say you draw the 10th pick or 11th pick, right? So it's really easy to say, I'm going to take, who's going to be there? Maybe Brian Thomas, maybe Midlake Neighbors, maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown, whatever. I'm going to start out with a wide receiver, and then I'll take A.J. Brown in the second. And then the 3-4 turn, I know I'm going to be able to get Kittle and Hurts. Like, you can feel almost certain that you're going to get Kittle and Hurts. And then
or if you like being more balanced, it's BTJ, and then probably the most underpriced running
Derrick
back in
Henry.
the early rounds is H.
Yeah, or H.
I think it's H.
or Henry.
Henry.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty sweet.
Yes,
I mean, every year people ask, what draft slot do I want? And sometimes I'm like, well, they're all, just taking in the middle allows you to harvest value, but there's not a clear.
That's my favorite in a
vacuum. Right, but now when you start to see the team you can build from a late first round, knowing that you're rolling the dice at running back, but every year we're rolling the dice at running back. And again, when we're talking about Hurts and Kittle, I just want to make another plug for Joe Bryant, my boss, VBD, value-based drafting, because it's like we're talking about 16 points and 20 points and raw points, but it's more the value over replacement that really matters. And
22 fantasy points at quarterback over the last 11 years has been worth 20% advantage versus low end QB1s. So QBs between 10 and 12. 20%, guys. That's a pretty good advantage.
We're undervaluing it. But why I think so in the strategy, you can really set up at both tight end and quarterback. I think a really clear strategy. I think between the conversation we're having, Dwain, you can have a real clear strategy where you say, basically, depending on your draft slot and how savvy, giving some credit to other players in your league, you might not be able to get the low-hanging fruit. Someone else might get the value, but that's okay. What's the next stop on the elevator, except the escalator, the down escalator? I don't know. Because if you miss on Hurts, you can say, hey, if Hurts is sitting there about what you expect him, great, Hurts. But if you miss, or if just someone else is so compelling, like someone else you didn't expect to be there, the next stop, I think is Baker Mayfield. And at tight end, we could say Sam Laporta. And I do want to ask you about, to really put a cap on this conversation, like, what about if you miss on these guys, like, later on? But let's talk about Baker Mayfield. And you're one of the reasons I love you, Dwain. I like a lot of things. Your mellifluous Texas twang. But also that you went by context matters, right? What a beautiful 2-word statement of purpose, right? Context matters. And you come from an analytics background, so it isn't that you aren't going to analyze, but you're saying, like, let's not call apples oranges. Like, let's look at context. And when it's either Jalen Hurts or Baker Mayfield, some of the context from last year is that, Jalen Hurts had many games where he was missing one of his key 3 players at the passing game last year. Baker Mayfield had a stretch where there's one game where his top 3 receivers were Sterling Shepard, Raheem Jarrett, and Trey Palmer. Remember the Cade Otton?
Really, it was Cade Otton.
Right. It was the Cade Otton blow up. Okay. So when you look at Jalen Hurts' average points last year, when you look at Baker Mayfield's average points last year, let us remember that they were sledding through some tough terrain at times. And that's not necessarily a given. So you start there with Baker Mayfield. Okay. So he was a top 5 quarterback last year, and he had a stretch. And if you were smart, you weren't even playing him. You were like, well, this isn't looking good. And he had a dip. Hurts likewise had a dip as a passer when his best targets weren't out there. So that might not happen this year. Chris Godwin might not dislocate his ankle. Mike Evans might not have a hamstring injury. But let's say it happens again. The Bucs know what's up. They drafted Emeka Egbuka in the first round, who is already, from all reports, ready to play. Like, just, I don't care who you're reading out of Tampa OTAs.
He's my most drafted player through 35.
Yeah, he's ready. He's ready to play. And by the way, Jalen McMillan's also very good. Jalen McMillan is good. Okay, what I mean by that is he's going to likely convert his targets into production, and he's going to get valuable targets whenever he's the 3rd or 4th receiver. Okay, this team has continuity on the offensive line. Now, yes, they have a turnover offensive coordinator. And there's a good argument that Liam Cohen and Baker Mayfield are one of those magical couples, because Liam Cohen took the job. He said, I took the job to work with Baker Mayfield. But Josh Grizzard is just getting promoted from within. And what has he said? He wants more vertical. He wants more downfield passing. And how many interceptions did Baker Mayfield have last year? Like 15? And it's fine. I mean, they let him play. They let him play, like, at the edge of his abilities. And now he's surrounded with a 4th target. Not to mention Bucky Irving is getting better. Rashad White is a good receiving back. Everything in this offense is getting better. So we think about offenses that can improve, Dwain, like Vegas and Chicago and Jacksonville, new coaches, right? Or even Carolina is like getting a chance to get into something now that Bryce Young is actually looking like he's a good quarterback to develop. But Tampa's like a top 3, top 5 offense that can even get better, should get better when you look at what's going on. And Baker Mayfield's the right guy to drive it. And this is also one of the few offenses that is a very good run offense and a very good pass offense. I'm having trouble finding the down case for Baker Mayfield, but that's why I invited you here.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I still have Baker ranked as like my QB7, so I like him. I think there are the challenges are he's still mostly a pocket passer who had a really big spike last year in touchdowns. So actually Baker Mayfield like spiked in every category.
Everything.
Right?
Yeah.
So passing touchdowns per attempt, 7.2% versus his career average of 5. The average NFL starter is at 4.6. So, I mean, I've got him projected at 5 this year. If you look at his passing yards per attempt, 7.9, career high versus 7.3 for his career average. 265 passing yards per game versus 234 for his career. And then also rushing yards per game. Like this there's this element with Baker that really clicked as far as scrambling and picking up key first downs when needed. He went to 22 rushing yards per game. His career average is 11, which was really lower than that. That 22 is actually pulling that number up over 10 now. So, one, he can't run that pure across all those categories again, right? And the easiest corollary I can give to this is what we did with CJ Stroud last year. We were like, oh my God, CJ Stroud, did you see what he did as a rookie? And now we've gone out, in addition to Nico Collins and Tank Dell, we've also gone and added Stephon Diggs. Okay. And they added Joe Mixon. And so we do this, right? Where we get into this scenario of look at all these different things they added. And sometimes we can just overestimate. And so the real key, honestly, in my opinion, some of these things are going to come down will be, does Baker continue doing his thing on the ground? Because that really does add value to him and can separate him. It could put him more in a bucket like the Trevor Lawrences and some of these other guys of the world, where it may not sound like a lot, but I mean, 2 extra to 3 points per game on the ground, and then every 6th game you get a rushing touchdown on top of that. Like, it goes a long way in really helping out, especially if it's a down passing game, and that's the game when he sneaks in the rushing touchdown, right, to really help you out. So I like Baker. I've got him ranked highly. My biggest challenge is I know some of these things are going to come down. And when I look at his ceiling and our ceiling projection model, it's right there at 23 points. It's still really good. It's not at the level of the dual threat elites, but it's the next tier down. But my challenge is there are a lot of other quarterbacks that go a lot later than him that have very similar ceilings. Now, I'm a ceiling player. So when you think about median projections for these players, some of them will be close to Baker. Some of them are not going to be quite as close to Baker. But Brock Purdy is going in round 9, so you can get him 1 to 2 rounds later than Baker, depending on where you're drafting. Caleb Williams. Now, Caleb Williams is a complete boom bust.
Is he good?
So I'm not sitting here.
One of the best questions of the offseason, Dwayne, is Caleb Williams good? And don't answer, because none of us know anyway.
Right. But if he is good as a passer, we know that he, if you look at him last year, he didn't have a rushing touchdown despite, nearly rushing for 500 yards, which is really hard to do. Like, the average quarterback that rushes like what Caleb did since 2011 scores at least 3.5 rushing touchdowns. So you just immediately add that on. And if he does turn into this elite QB1 overall, talent as a passer and throws for 4,400 yards and runs for 500, you can see the ceiling. Caleb could be like the QB5. Like, he could be the guy. He could basically be the guy trying to challenge Burrow, for the QB5. But to your point, complete boom bust. There's also a chance you draft Caleb, and by week 4, you're like, I'm cutting this guy.
Enough.
Like, that's in the range of outcomes. I don't think you're doing that with Baker. But Dak Prescott has a similar ceiling to what we have with Baker at 22.4 points.
Oh, sure.
I definitely like the offense better, for the Bucs, but adding what we're getting, with George Pickens to go along with CeeDee Lamb, I think this is the, if Dak can stay healthy, that's the best dude. That's the best combo he's had, because when he had Amari Cooper, CeeDee was still rounding into form. CeeDee Lamb wasn't the CeeDee Lamb that we know today. So you put those two together and then let Jake Ferguson be like your third option in the seam kind of thing. Like, I like Dak. And then there's Drake May, who also last year, despite not having any weapons, was pretty good as a passer, and we know what he can do as a rusher. And then finally, there's Trevor Lawrence, where we've added Travis Hunter to go with Brian Thomas Jr., who broke out in this huge way. So here's what I would say. I like Baker. I'm willing to take Baker. I think if you put all things together, floor, median projection, and ceiling projection, Baker's better than all the guys I just named. But if you're willing to lean more into the ceiling projections and then think about the opportunity cost of what you trade off to where you're taking Baker versus some of these other names, that's probably the reason why I haven't taken him as much. Now, I do take him because I've mostly been drafting best ball right now, and I'm with you. I just love stacking all the Bucs. Yeah. I mean, I'll take Baker with all the pass catchers that he has. So it's kind of a nerdy math answer, Sig, because and on pure vibes, like, I just love watching Baker. I love seeing what Baker has been able to turn into, and that he's been embraced by these coaching staffs over the last 2 years that have truly just let him go be himself and let him play to his strengths. And it has worked out extremely well. And to your point, adding Emeka Egbuka, one, if Chris Godwin and Mike Evans stay healthy all year, that's great. Two, if one of them doesn't, then now you've got added insurance, right? And you also talked about Jalen McMillan, right, who would probably be more the guy to get snaps if Evans had to miss some games, right? He gives you that vertical element. So they have depth where if you are missing these guys, like, you have players that you can bring in. So again, all that to say, like, I have Baker ranked, right, probably right around where you're saying to take him. I just haven't taken him as much, just because of the way I look at the ceiling logic. There are a lot of these other guys that I like that go later that I feel really good about.
Yeah, look, if somebody said, I hear you on Jalen Hurts, Dwayne, I hear you on Baker Mayfield, Sig, but I'm just waiting and taking Dak Prescott, I'm not going to say they're wrong. I mean, that might be.
You know what people need to do? They have to do the 2v2, Sig. So what they need to think of is, okay, I get Baker
or
in this round,
the two combinations,
and then I get this other player at wide receiver or tight end or whatever other position you're thinking, this other wide receiver or running back in the round with Dak. That's where it starts to get hard.
Yeah, how compelling.
Because obviously Baker's going a lot earlier. So if you look at Baker and where he's going, like from an ADP standpoint right now on Underdog, that's where Emeka Egbuka goes. That's where, a lot of these other, you are getting into a range where it's like feasible because you're getting into names that have question marks like J.D. Higgins, Travis Kelce, Travis Etienne. So it's not like you're having to take him a round before where there's a lot of names that we feel a lot more certainty about. So it's not a terrible trade-off, but I would say depending on the league you're in, like it's going to be different than what Underdog is. And so go check out your ADP and do the 2v2. If I take Baker in round 5 instead of this running back, okay, then what running back am I going to have to take where I would get Dak? Or would I rather take the running back here and then take Dak where I can get him? Like those are the type of scenarios I really like to try to work through. And the key is, guys, doing it, using the average draft position for the site you're using, whether it's Yahoo, ESPN, Sleeper, doesn't matter. You can get ADP for all those sites. So you can check it out at fantasylife.com for free, in fact. So you can check that out. But I like to do the trade-offs. I like to see what do I think those trade-offs are. And if it's really close and I'm not that worried about it, then I just take Baker. Right. If I like what I can get later.
Right.
So it really does vary though from site to site, like where Baker Mayfield is going right now. Like I'm trying to pull it up on the fly because I just started thinking about it. I'm like, man, where is he going on some of these other sites?
Seventh round. Right about the point where the names at wide receiver and running back aren't quite as compelling, depending on if you have like
So Sleeper, right, which is 2 starting wide receivers, 2 flex. So you got 2 flex spots. He goes pick 63. Okay. Right? On Underdog, you're getting him at pick 94. So 63 is a lot more expensive when you have to have 2 flex players. Baker Mayfield on Yahoo, which is 2 starting running backs, 2 starting wide receivers, 1 flex. He's going pick 55. And then if you look at ESPN, he's going pick 76 right now. So there's going to be some Underdog. I actually think is one of the easier ones.
Yeah,
where you could probably make the case that you just take Baker versus some of the other names I gave you. But I think on some of these other sites, man, if you start looking at the other players that are going to be going in the range of where you're talking about taking Baker, there's some pretty big trade-offs, Siggs, versus what you're going to get by waiting on Dak. Yeah. Like if I look in those ranges here, you got Quinshon Judkins, Trevion Henderson, Calvin Ridley. There's a lot of different names going in that range, and you know how tricky it is in the 2 flex leagues, right?
Right. Sure.
Obviously 3 wide receivers and 1 flex is basically the same thing, but anytime you're adding flexes or starting players, it pushes the quarterbacks down.
Yeah. There's a smaller piece of a larger pie, but all of this stuff we laid out, I think is really excellent for tracing out the psychology of how you make decisions in the moment in your draft, because you're comparing, and I love gut feel, even an emotional thing, like how does taking Baker make you feel versus like who's the 7th round running back you're looking at? I don't know. I mean, Aaron Jones, who's the wide receiver, Rome Odunze. I mean, depending on what you walk into with your draft, in those choices, there's that element. But like you said, the other element you should think about is if I don't take this player, what round am I going to address this spot? Who else is available in that round? Because if you have somebody, if the same round where Dak Prescott is going, where you're making sure that you get, for me, it'd be like, I don't know, Isaiah Likely or someone like that. Like you just don't want to let that player go past that point, then you can't necessarily count on that. So it's how much, when you're making a choice in the round that's on the clock, you're thinking about how you feel about players later on to inform that choice. So I really like.
Where are you on Purdy? Because like he's a really interesting one. Like is he scramble? He scrambles a little bit. Like I mean, he goes 40 picks after Baker on Sleeper.
And he also is surrounded by good weapons. He's in a good offense, an efficient offense. So I mean, I think Brock Purdy could be one of the right answers. But just to finalize the Baker talk, because I think it's a really great case study. And then we got like 10 minutes, and we're gonna do rapid fire, like the lightning round, before we go off the rails. Is that like what you laid out? I think is very much correct and accurate when you're talking about Baker Mayfield's career and the aggregate, okay? But I would argue, Dwain, that if we're looking at Baker Mayfield's career, that you almost look at it as someone who died and then was resurrected. And everything that happened with Cleveland, Carolina, that was a different Baker. He had to have what I like to call a career near-death experience. This has happened. There are other players. If I racked my brain, I could sure come up with some other players where the career near-death experience clarifies things for them. And of course, it's also falling in with Liam Cohen, falling in with Sean McVay, inheriting Tom Brady's team, you know what I mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things that came together and converged here. But if you're taking Baker Mayfield's performance in 2024, looking at his season averages versus his career, or per play averages, you're including that old Baker Mayfield that doesn't exist anymore. It's really the apples to apples are what he's done since he's been with Tampa. But even that, he took a big step forward in efficiency and productivity just from 2023 to 2024. And you say, well, what was Liam Cohen? Get in on Trevor Lawrence or something like that. Maybe the offensive line holds them back. But the thoughts are coming too fast, Dwayne. Can this offense get even better?
No, you're right.
Can this offense get even better? The offense should get even better. It should get even better. And you might look at certain efficiency rates and say, well, that's so high above the league average. How is that possibly sustainable? Well, how about having 4 excellent receivers? That's how it's sustainable, right? Touchdown rates, yards per target, and things like that. Like if you're looking for the context that would lead us to say it's an outlier that could become an even bigger outlier. Because I think if we look back in time, that's happened, right? Like year 1 looks like an outlier, like Justin Jefferson's rookie.
Very rarely, though.
But those are but identifying those cases, Dwayne, are what wins championships. Being able to stick
like Aaron Rodgers hasn't done it. Patrick Mahomes hasn't done it back to back. Like the very best players haven't. Now, having said all that, man, like Baker's projected as one of the highest on passing stuff. He's projected as one of the highest guys across the board and everything, because the way our projection model works is it's really more leaning to the recent years. It's really degrading the years that are further back. And it's really, we use the league average as a kind of a way to regress and make sure we're not going too crazy with the projections. But no, when you start looking at Baker's passing projections, like his passing ceiling numbers are basically just below Burrow. And that's it. Especially if you look at his ceiling. So I agree. I agree with you on all those things. It's just, it is really hard to run that pure in back-to-back years. Like 95% of the time in a scenario like Baker's, even if he's and here's the thing though, he can still really be good this year and still be really valuable in fantasy, right? It's just, it's going to be tough for him to repeat all those numbers. But we're giving him a lot of credit as having a shot at doing it. And so I like Baker. I think it comes down to your trade-offs.
Just to unpack absolutely. I mean, there's no rigid right or wrong answers. I mean, chances are when we look back, there's going to be a lot of different ways to build a team that can win a championship. But the last thing I'll say, because I have to get in, it's my show, I get to get into the last word, is I would argue that even though the numbers say Baker ran pure last year, even though the numbers say Baker ran pure, the injuries say he didn't. The injuries say that things weren't all going in his favor last year. So that's the part, that's where context matter comes in. But this is what's fun about fantasy football, and what's fun about the couch is getting people together that think too much about this stuff and attack it from every angle and all their life experience and all of their knowledge. And that's what's great about having Dwayne here. But now we've covered a lot of quarterbacks. We've covered, multi-tier quarterback strategy. And we started with George Kittle. Okay, Dwayne, we started with George Kittle, but where we touched on Baker Mayfield, we touched on Dak Prescott, and we haven't yet talked about the tight ends. And I've got guys, I already mentioned one, Isaiah Likely, but we talked about how you feel about players later on. So who are some tight ends that may motivate you to wait on tight end, or are there any tight ends that you like later on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much like in on Kittle, but if I had to pick like some of these guys that are going later at the position, I do think Isaiah Likely is one of them. And look, he's having to share time. Obviously, Mark Andrews is still a really good player as well. But what if they do suddenly just give Isaiah Likely 75, 80% of the playing time? They could also do the same thing for Mark Andrews, by the way. But if they did that, right? That's going to be really huge for Likely. The other thing is last year, at the end of the year, when Zay Flowers was hurt, what did they do? Instead of trying to get another receiver on the field, they actually just let Isaiah Likely play more. And so there is this potential opportunity. I know it never really happens. We had the Aaron Hernandez, Gronkowski years, and then we kind of try to manifest that anytime we think there's two pretty good tight ends together, and it never does quite work out. But it could be the answer, like that really having Likely out there together with Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman is really just the best version of the Ravens passing game. And so I really like what we've seen, from Likely. So if I'm thinking late round and I just missed out and I'm looking for that ceiling, it's him. The other two guys, Sig, are just the rookies. I know that when you look at Loveland, he landed in a spot where we've got Cole Kmet, who's a capable guy. But once you get to like tight end 13 or 14, I would rather just take Loveland than the other names that are there. The other names that are there, once you're not talking Likely, in my opinion, they're probably not winning you your league. Colson Loveland, we could just see in week 1, they play him the whole time and you want to have him. If not, you can cut him and go grab one of the other guys you might have drafted at that same spot, or a player that can be as good as the other guys that you didn't draft at that spot. Right. And then I think Ty Warren is the other one, especially if Anthony Richardson's not the starting quarterback. It feels weird to be in a world where we're hoping Daniel Jones is the starting quarterback for the weapons. But I do think Daniel Jones and what he likes to do underneath would be big for a guy like Tyler Warren, which is really get the ball in his hands, let him run after the catch. Like that's the best part of his game right now. So it's really Likely. It's the rookies, and I like leaning into the uncertainty. The thing that pushes those rookies down is people are just uncertain of what their role is going to be. But here's the thing we do feel pretty good about. It's the talent. These are very talented players. So if I'm doing the utilization report and I'm coming to hang out with you on the couch in week 3, Sig, and we're like, biggest utilization reveals of the first 3 weeks, and we're like, Colson Loveland's playing 85% of the snaps, you're going to be very happy to have him. Versus if you have Hunter Henry on your team and he's playing 85% of the snaps, we'll be like, we're getting to start him. Like, it's not bad. But if it's Loveland or Ty Warren getting those numbers, you have to think. And I love what you talk about, the feeling. I like to actually think about that. I actually like to think about the way that I'm going to feel, because we play this game to have fun and enjoy it. And those moments give me excitement. If I were suddenly talking with you in week 3 and we're like, Colson Loveland has an 85% route participation and DJ Moore is still in the doghouse, and right now, Romo Dunze is still kind of looking like he's not the guy. Like, we could be talking about Colson Loveland as the centerpiece to the Bears offense, right? In the passing game, he is good enough of a player to break out early. So I would say the rookies are the
and there's a lot of choices. Look, this should make you feel like get George Kittle, or if you miss on George Kittle or want to go with someone else, because I would add to the list of late round tight ends. And I agree with the rookies, with Colson Loveland, the signature first pick of the Ben Johnson regime. With Ty Warren, you can tell they want to make him a thing. They want to make him Taysom Hill plus. They're so excited about Tyler Warren, they might just force him into that role just to show that's why they took him so high. I mean, Shane Steichen was saying he wanted basically Tyler Warren like months before the draft. And then I would add, and I mentioned Dallas Goedert. I think that's a good one. I'd be fine with starting Dallas Goedert as my one, and Tucker Kraft. Because Tucker Kraft might be one of those dudes. As he's
Tucker Kraft's one of mine too.
I mean, he's one of those guys that might just be so good. Again, it's summer vacations. We're about to go off the rails. It's summer vacation, and we can all remember, like, around middle school, like when us and our classmates are going through puberty. Sometimes you'd come back from summer vacation and be like, "Whoa, like you're wow, like 3 months ago you were a different person than you are now." That could be Tucker Kraft, right? I mean, that could be like, think about what he's already done year 1 and year 2, and he might just, he might be turning into like a George Kittle type. As far as
Kraft, I have higher than all the guys we've talked about.
Yeah,
I have him at 10. I don't know where you have him in your ranks.
10. I mean, I have him 6. I have him 6. Look, I want no part.
Oh, Jesus.
I want no part. I want no part of David Njoku. I want no part of Travis Kelce. I want no part of Mark Andrews. I want no part of these guys that don't have an upside case. I don't know why they're going ahead of Tucker Kraft. I don't know why they're going ahead of Isaiah Likely. I don't know why they're even. I mean, Dallas Goedert. I think there's a debate if you're talking about old men. Which of the 3 old men are set up best to like have fantasy relevance? Again, because we're talking about the wind in the sails of Eagles. The rankings of your Eagles pass catchers don't account for the real range of outcomes for the volume of this offense. We know it's going to be efficient. I just think that we're lowballing the volume on all these guys. So I mean, I like with my rankings, Dwain, I don't care. I mean, I want my rankings to deliver a message. I want my rankings to say, like, I would not be taking this guy. Even if you put it in some sort of accuracy contest, I might lose because I'm willing to say, no, Travis Kelce, my tight end 12 or 13 this year. In other words, don't take him. Tucker Kraft, Isaiah Likely, my tight end 6 and 7. Think about taking them, think about it. But this is fun, man. I feel like when you're on the couch with me, Dwain, we really need to expand it to like 3 hours. Like one of those couches is like in one of those baller houses where like 12 people can sit on the couch, like that's the couch that we need when Dwain is here. But I said it's summer vacation. Let's go off the rails, Dwain. What was your favorite summer vacation as a kid?
Right.
What's the one you remember the best and most?
The best summer vacation I remember, so my family, like, we didn't have like a lot of money or anything growing up, but I do remember my mom, like, every summer she would take us to the Texas coast, or like every other summer. And so we would go, and my uncle would go, and my aunt would go. So it was kind of like a family trip. My cousins would be there. We would stay in like some cheap hotel. We would drive to the beach, every day. But it was like every part of the day had its own like adventure, right? In the morning, it's like wake up, you get your breakfast, you go to the beach, you hang out, and then in the afternoon, it's like, okay, everybody wants to cool off. Let's eat lunch, go find some place to eat, you get your ice cream or whatever. And then at night, though, my uncle, like, he liked to go fishing, like off the pier, and he would go crabbing. And so it was like all of these different adventures, like built into one day that you got to look forward to. And so it really stuck with me because my wife and I, we take our kids to the beach every summer. Like, we've been doing it. So we take them to Destin. They get to go to a little nicer beach than the one that I went to. But you know what? The memories, I think, are still all the same. Like, I still had all those great memories from that, and they stuck with me long enough that we wanted to do those things with our kids. So we love going to the beach. Well, now mostly we go to Florida, Destin area, and the kids absolutely love it. And if there's ever a year where we're thinking about skipping it, oh my God, like, they start raising hell. They're like, no, we've got to go. And by the way, I have 2 kids that are 20 plus years old, and they still want to go on these trips. So I feel like they feel similarly to the way I felt. How about you? What's your one that you remember?
Well, what's funny, let's talk about the beach. Let's talk about the beach as it deals with summer vacation, but as it deals with life. Because, and I'm with you on, like, it's funny you say Texas beaches, because I remember going to Port A when I lived in Austin, because you could actually drive to Port A in like 3.5 hours. And I mean, you could go further down the coast to like South Padre, and there's like nicer beaches, like some wilderness and stuff. Port A is like people pull their trucks right up on the beach. Like the truck, you know what I'm saying? Like, but it's like you said, it's folks. It's folks, and you go to some place like the Crazy Cajun where they do seafood boils, and and I mean, it's scruffy. It's scruffy, like, cabin, like the equivalent of a cabin, but like on the beach. But it's the people you're with, like you said, and the things that you do. The water's murky. That was before the Deepwater Horizon. The water was murky. Like, you might feel something bump into your leg. You don't know what that is. That's fine. You're out there with your buddies, and you got your beer. So the beach is good everywhere. But then, like you said, there are better beaches than others. Like, we're about to head to Del Mar in North County, San Diego. And I'm holding up my Rip Curl thing here. This is is surfing snowman.
I've been to Del Mar.
Isn't that all of us, right? Aren't we all Aren't we all just melting? Aren't we all trying to catch a good wave before we melt, right? We're all that snowman.
Pretty much, yeah.
North County, San Diego is.
Well, you're putting the 2 things we love to do as a family together. The other thing the kids love is the snow skiing in the winter, which was something else my parents did that stuck with me. So
That's
it's
awesome.
like they want to go to the beach in the summer, they want to go ski in the winter. So you've got actually, I'm gonna have to buy that shirt.
Yeah, it was cool. I found this like on the.
It's bringing the beach. It's bringing the beach and the snow together.
It's beautiful, and I'll get to skiing in a second. But I just want to say this because I wasn't a beach person when I got together with my wife. But she's like an otter. Like, she belongs in the water. Like, she's an aquatic being. And immediately we went out to Del Mar, and et cetera, et cetera. And it took me a little bit, but then I got it. Like a ding, like I got it. The beach, and I think that there's something really mystical about the beach. It's where the land meets the water. It's ethereal or transitory, and yet solid enough to you feel it under your feet. like our lives, like the sands of the hourglass. So were the days of our lives.
It's also like just perspective. Like when you see how powerful and huge the ocean is.
Yes.
And then there's little old you.
Well,
And just sitting. Our favorite part of being at the beach, like, is renting chairs, and you got them so they're set up every day when you get down there. You've got the umbrella ready, and Amanda and I, like, we let the kids play, do all their thing, and like we hang out in those chairs. We get under the umbrella, we read, but just listening to the waves, almost like they're just rolling over you, even though they're not touching you. Yeah, like it's therapeutic.
It is. Well, it's a beautiful sound machine, right? Waves, Dwain, waves are the heartbeat of the love between the earth and the moon, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like, waves are because of the moon. And
Yeah,
I'm not going to go. My name is Sigmund. Jungian collective subconscious. I am also Cancer. Cancer season, by the way. I know my wife's a Leo. Like, Leo season. Cancer's like, I guess it's Cancer season. I don't know. I'm gonna go. If you're a Cancer, as I am, I'm about to turn 50. If you're a Cancer, know that crabs' legs are moving forward when they're moving backward, and their legs are moving backward when they're moving forward. And crabs never take a straight line to go between two places. Anyway, yeah, the moon, when you're watching and feeling and hearing and letting the waves crash you, always reminds me, Ryan Riddle said that tackling Marshawn Lynch was like trying to tackle a wave in the ocean. Very picturesque. So I can wax rhapsodic about the beach and the ocean. And like you said, it represents the great unknown. Like 80-90% of the action on Earth in the ocean. Like all the stuff up on the ground where we are, that's actually like the opening band. That's not even the main show on Earth, it's where we came from, right? But you said skiing real quick, because I was just up in New Mexico, including Taos, which I could go talk about that trip that I just took a lot. Real quick, briefly, like what's your favorite place you've skied, and the one place you haven't got to ski yet that you want to ski?
We love Durango.
Oh, yes. Purgatory?
Yeah, Durango, because it's small enough that, like, it's big enough you get to do plenty of skiing, but small enough where, like, we set up base camp at the bottom of the mountain. We're with other families, and it all kind of leans back to the same place. And we've got like our circle, and everybody sits down, you have your beverage or whatever it is that you want to do. The kids are all hanging out. So absolute blast. But I've never done Telluride, and I've heard that it's pretty good. So I haven't done that. And then this year we're thinking about switching it up this year. Like, we're not for sure what we're going to do yet, but I think we are going to try something
cool.
different.
Very cool. I think you take Route 666 to
I'll have to
get Telluride. Route 666. I'm not sure. I was just in Durango. We'll talk about that after the show's over. I was just in Durango last week. A very interesting place. Not as interesting as talking to Dwain McFarland. And you guys know, Fantasy Life has so many great people. People that often visit the show, including Ian Harditz, who will be back here soon. Dwain McFarland. Just having fun with fantasy, but also trying to help you win, being serious about it. We're enjoying it, but we're also serious about helping you win. We're serious about helping you win because you're so kind. You give us the privilege, the pleasure, you validate us, but you also allow us to serve you and be part of your life, and you're a big part of our life. And let's continue to keep that goodness flowing as the anticipation of football is around the corner. But first, go to a beach, go somewhere where you listen to nature, be back in the bosom of your mother with nature, but always stay classy.